would like to share with you the pastor who preached at the funeral of his daughter.
My name is Brad Hovis. I am the pastor of Highview Church, and I am the father of the deceased Molly Ann. You know, some have asked me why in the world I would want to get up here and say something. And the answer to that is that I believe I have a message directly from God to you. I believe that God has something that He wants to tell you, and I believe that He wants to use a mourning father to do that. When I found out that I was going to be a father for the second time, and when I found out that I would have a little girl, as any father would, I was completely overwhelmed with ideas of having a little girl to be mine. And like every father thinks about that little girl, I began to look differently at women. I began to appreciate the differences between men and women much more. And I began thinking, you know, I need to appreciate these things about women because one day my little girl's going to need me. My little girl's going to need me to, when she comes home from school and someone has called her a name, she's going to need a daddy to say that everything is going to be okay, that you're beautiful, that I love you. When I thought about having a little girl, I thought about the day that she would walk an aisle when she would get married. But when I thought about having a little girl, I thought about the day that I would be able to do her wedding as opposed to her funeral. And back in the garden, we see a loving God. We see a God who creates His offspring. We see a God who has made His humans, made them after His own image, that He has the utmost joy with, that they are representing Him, and that they're showing who God is to everything on the earth because He is their Father. He is the one who loves them. He is the one who has created them, and He created them in a perfect place, in a perfect world. We oughtn't to be looking at Adam and Eve in a sarcastic way because every single one of us would have made the exact same choice. I've not met one person in my entire life who's not been a sinner. I've not met one person in my entire life that has chosen their love for something else over their love for God. I have not met one person, not in this room, not in any encounter, that would not have done the exact same thing. And so let this be a reminder that death is a reminder of two things. Death is a reminder of sin. It is sin that opened up the grave that I put my daughter in this morning. It is sin that has affected every aspect of your life. It is your sin that you have committed that has kept this love between you and God at a distance. It is your sin that you are responsible for. It is your sin. It is sins that others have committed against you. It is these sins that we say, how can there be a God? How can a loving God allow something like this to happen? And I know many of you are asking that question. I mean, she wasn't even 3 months old. How can God let her die? How can you say that your God is loving and let her die? I think we're asking the wrong question. I think the question that you should be asking instead of why would God let this happen is why does God let us live? Because if you remember in the garden, He said, if you eat this tree, you're going to die. God was completely gracious in allowing them to fulfill their life. God is completely gracious in allowing you to fulfill your life. God was completely gracious to Haley and myself and our family in allowing us to have 84 days with a little angel here on earth. We don't look at that as a sign of God is angry, God is bad, God is a bad God. We look at that and say God is completely gracious to us. It was God that is gracious, that is allowing you to breathe right now. Not one of us is guaranteed that we'll make it to the parking lot. Not one of us is guaranteed that we'll see tomorrow. We ought to look at funerals and death and say, God, thank you for being so gracious to me. Thank you for allowing my life to live. It should do two things. One, remind us of sin. And two, allow us to see God's grace that is happening right now in our life. I look at the work of Jesus and say, how incredibly loving and gracious you were to me. That God came onto the earth to save and change and make everything better. Every bad thing that you've ever experienced, every sinful thing that has happened to you, every sin that you have done, Jesus has come to completely change it. We use the word redeem it. He just came to fix it. The Bible can be broken up really in two main things. We jacked everything up and Jesus came to fix it. And so I want you to look at Jesus as a person who is God, who came to do much greater things than any other president or king or anybody else. He came onto the earth so that you can have life and you can have life more abundantly. He came on the earth to take your pain away. He is the reason right now that I am able to stand before you and say, even though my daughter died while a transplant was happening, even though I authorized the transplant to happen to my little girl on the operating table, I say God has been completely gracious to me. Jesus has come in and changed my life, and I thank Him for everything that He's given to me. Her and everything else.
That's theology meeting the road right there. That's it, right there. Friend, if your theology isn't in place, it's going to happen. It's simply going to happen. You're going to have a tragedy. It's going to happen. And unless we understand that God is sovereign and He is good and He owes us nothing and He has provided us everything and that He's working everything out for His sovereign plan, for His good and for our glory, I'm telling you, you will be wrecked when that day comes. And you will not be able to sound like this man who preached at his own daughter's funeral.
Like a father who waits and wants for his little girl to get married, I dreamed of the day I would get to dance with my daughter. And the doctor told us that she had died. And we went back to the room. I went first. And I saw my little girl, and I held her, and I cried tears that no father should ever cry. And the family came in, and Haley got to hold her, and they ministered to us. And then they left, and it was time for Haley and I to sit there with our little girl. And I took that little girl, and I held her just like this. And I looked her in the eyes, and her little face, with her little cheeks. And with a song singing in the background, I began to dance with my daughter. And we danced and we danced all around that hospital room with my lifeless little girl. Let me tell you something about the kingdom. My little girl doesn't have tubes anymore. My little girl doesn't have wires anymore. My little girl is dancing with Jesus right now. My little girl can taste food that we can't imagine. My little girl is sipping wine that we so long to have. My little girl is doing exactly what God created her to do, to love Him and enjoy Him forever. I hope that you will love Him and that you will enjoy Him forever. And now that I've preached a message that I can't preach any better, and given everything that I can give, I'm going to sit down next to my wife and mourn the loss of my little girl.